Hey, Grimmy here, and for this video I'm going to be doing something a little bit different that I've never actually done on the channel as like a full dedicated video like this before. I'm capturing footage on my laptop on this Dragon Ball Legends character website to break down my, I guess, predictions, or at least my concept for what I believe should be Gogeta Blue's Zenkai Awakening, LF Gogeta Blue's Zenkai Awakening, if he is to ever get one. I personally believe that he's a really hype character. He's really just beloved in the community. So I do think the devs are saving it up for an important celebration. So either this anniversary in either part 2 or part 3, this year's Legends Festival, or next year's anniversary, which would be the 7th year anniversary for Dragon Ball Legends. And I guess that would kind of make sense because 7 is a pretty important number in Dragon Ball. So I could see why they would, just save Gogeta Blue's Zenkai Awakening for such a long time. Let's just jump right into it. I've used Google Chrome's inspect element function to kind of show in a much more visible and easy to digest way on what I believe his kit modifications should be. So let's just jump right in. First of all, main ability, right? I'm far stronger than that. This is actually a pretty unique main ability because it's a text that represents a quote or a piece of dialogue that is all capitalized on the first letter of every word. When, if you actually check out some of the more recent characters, when their main ability is to indicate them saying something, it's usually just the first letter that gets capitalized. So maybe they're going to change that, but I don't know. The original main ability, Gogeta draws his ult, which is, kind of classic, obviously. He gets 30% health, which is pretty decent, and only 40 ki, which is a little small by today's standards. He does get the effect minus 100% to enemies sustained damage cut effects for 30 timer counts, which is actually really good. And on top of that, he also nullifies his attribute downgrades and abnormal conditions, or at least not necessarily the ones that he already has, but the incoming ones for about 30 timer counts. His main ability requirement, 25 timer counts, it's classic. It's the usual standard requirement for most characters' main abilities. Now, how would I change that? Let's check it out right here. I've already, again, written my own modifications. First of all, he obviously still draws the ult, so it remains the same, and also gets 30% health because I do feel like that's enough. As long as he's not debuffed with like health restoration, deductions, he is still going to heal 30% of his health, which is a lot. And it can change him from having 20% health to 50% health, so again, pretty big effect. But I have increased the amount of ki that he would get from 40 to 70, just so that if I don't want to use the ultimate right away, I can still chain it with a couple of cards like a strike and special move. His two other effects for, the sustained damage cut penetration, as well as the attribute downgrade and abnormal condition nullification remains the same for the same duration as well. The only difference is that I've actually added the cannot be cancelled in the parentheses, because it is a pretty powerful effect, but a lot of characters these days have no trouble cancelling the opponent's, attribute upgrades or buff effects, and so these kinds of effects, they need to actually have that cannot be cancelled part in order to add to that competitive level to the character, right? Moving on to the first unique ability, Ultimate Fusion. Applies the following effects to self when battle starts. This is one of the, classic, flat, start of battle buffs. It's 60% damage afflicted, 30% damage reduction, and 50% ki recovery, which is okay. So he basically has ki recovery increased by default, which is pretty good. But I do believe it can be better. First of all, I've given him an extra 40% damage inflicted, so from 60% to 100%. This is the bare minimum, in my opinion. Like, if you want to push it to 110, 120, 150, go ahead. You can put it in the comment section if you do believe that I may have kind of gotten a bit soft in terms of giving out these buffs, because, I want him to not actually be intensely broken. Same thing for the damage reduction. I've given him 60%. As opposed to his initial 30%. If you think he deserves 70, then yeah, I can agree with you. And I've also given him 70% to ki recovery because I just thought 100% would be a little too much, and 70 fits just right. Oh, right, and on top of that, there's also a second part of the unique ability. Applies the following effects to self when this character enters the battlefield. He gets 10% health, 30 ki, and 20% to damage inflicted for 20 timer counts, as well as special cover change nullification for 10 timer counts. Now, at the time when this character initially released, this was a pretty powerful ability, right? Because having that cover change be so consistent for the character, you would basically be locking out a lot of these meta units who could cover change very often, and this make it easier to maintain a long, nice combo. And I've actually buffed those effects here. First of all, the health restoration remains the same. I think 15% would be a little too much, especially considering that he's already healing by 30% from his main. More healing in this specific part of the unique ability, I think, would be a bit overkill, and would turn this Gogeta into more of a tank than an offensive unit, so it wouldn't really fit his typing. I have given him an extra 50 ki, as opposed to the 30 from before, because, again, I think having that extra ki will allow you to be able to combo into like special moves and the such, and more expensive cards, essentially. And then I've added the damage inflicted buffs from 20 to 30%, and made it uncancelable, because again, buff canceling, attribute upgrade canceling is really common nowadays in so many characters, so that cannot be cancelled part is essential, and the same thing you can see for his special cover change nullification. This, I don't know if this is too much or too little, but essentially I've removed the limitation on how many times it can activate, and I've made sure that it cannot be cancelled, but it's only for 10 timer counts. Nowadays, like it takes really long combos to fully take down an opponent, and so only having it for 10 timer counts I don't think is enough. But on the other hand, the cannot be cancelled part of it definitely helps with dealing with cancels enemy buff effects that the opponent may have. But that's about it. I haven't really changed too much out of the unique ability. Moving on to the second unique ability, all surpassing power. Right, so first of all, he gets 25% to damage inflicted as a base against powerful opponent. I've buffed it up to 30% because we have a bunch of strong, powerful opponent characters, though they're not as prominent as they once were. You know, I have characters like Golden Frieza and Super 17. They're not as good as they once were, right? I think that's definitely a point to be made, but they're certainly still strong. And while they may not be the best in the game, they are definitely competitive. And just because they're not the best doesn't mean that they're good or viable enough. So that buff still applies there, and it deserves to be modified and increased, in my opinion. And then the next part of his unique, that second unique ability would be his damage buffs. Upon landing a strike or blast arts hit, he gets 10% to damage inflicted up to 50%, and 5% to ultimate damage inflicted up to 30%. So the damage inflicted effect can activate 5 times, while the ultimate damage effect can activate for 6. And as a base, it already cannot be cancelled, so it is very impressive. As you know, like an old unit, you can kind of see why this Gogeta aged so well and is so beloved by the community. But I've actually buffed it even further, because why not? The effects actually remain the same. I kept it to 10 and 5% for both the regular damage and the ultimate damage. I've just raised the limits, right? Nowadays, I feel like, some characters just can sustain these really long, unstoppable combos. And so I've put card draw speed in a separate part of the in a different unique ability, so just bear with me here. So it'll make sense, right? He gets 100 up to 100%, which means that the damage inflicted effect can activate up to 10 times instead of 5, and the same thing applies for the ultimate damage inflicted effect, because now it goes up to 50%. I think this is okay. Like, why not? He definitely deserves a higher attacking power, especially to deal with a lot of these stronger units that are now in the meta. And he has a regular cover change, and that remains unchanged. And if the devs want to add an additional effect for his cover change, like maybe he cancels buff effects, reduces Dragon Balls, he could do that. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, I don't know how to actually add new bits of text into the, through inspect element into the text in the website, so it's just, I'm gonna have to kind of communicate it through my words alone. But moving on to the third and fourth unique ability, which, I've written myself. The first one, I gave it the name of Dominant Azure Hue, Azure like blue. The first effect has everything to do with him having his attacks be evaded by the enemy. I feel like now more than ever, the enemies have just, your opponents in PvP have just kind of, I guess, what's the word for it? They've kind of had a liking and a habit of relying on a passive playstyle in order to win. Like, perfect vanishes nowadays are just like everywhere, right? It's kind of bad in my opinion, because Dragon Ball is all about fighting, whereas like in most cases in Dragon Ball Legends PvP, it's usually people kind of standing still for the right opportunity, which doesn't really fit with how Dragon Ball is, especially like in the show. And so I've added this part to kind of help with getting rid of passive play in PvP. Even though they don't actually debuff the enemy, it's just buffs for Gogeta. So I gave him 50% to damage inflicted for 10 timer counts, minus 10 to all arts costs permanently, which means that if the enemy just continues to vanish, then yeah, he's gonna have like really cheap cards. And I do think I kind of made like an unbalanced addition there. It should like be reset at some point, maybe when he switches out or something like that. But he also has an arts card draw speed increased by 1 level for 30 timer counts, so if the enemy chooses to evade Gogeta's attacks multiple times, he can get additional card draw speed and an insane stacking of damage as well as cost decrease. I think this is pretty good, but it definitely doesn't work too well in the case that the enemy performs a perfect vanish, in which case Gogeta is going to get hit by a combo, and that's where the second clause of the unique ability is going to come in. The following effects occur when hit by an enemy's arts attack. He restores own health by 2%, so it's a constant effect like what you see with Ultra Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, sorry, there's no Ultra Super Saiyan 2 Gogeta. Ultra Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, where when he takes a hit from like an enemy's arts, he actually restores health. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words here, but every time Gohan gets hit with an arts twice for the first time, he gets additional health, he heals up. And the same thing applies for Gogeta, it's just that it's for a lesser amount, but it happens consistently all the time. And on top of that, he gets 30% to damage inflicted for 7 timer counts. The reason that timer count limitation is there is because, you know, I want it to kind of stack, so if the enemy performs like a really long combo, I want it to stack to at least like 60%, 90%, but I don't want it to stack infinitely because he may end up with having like, I don't know, 300% damage inflicted, which is just broken and unfair. So that's what the timer count limitation is for. And below it, I have plus 10 to the next special move arts damage inflicted. It could be ultimate arts, it could be special. It's just that, you know, in the previous unique ability, I actually talked about how his his ultimate arts damage is already buffed. So this part covers his special move damage just to make sure that it hits harder. Especially later, you'll see that Gogeta doesn't actually get special move damage on his blue card, he gets universal damage, but we'll talk about that later. However, unlike the regular damage buffs that are also a part of this unique ability, it's not limited to a timer count. So, say for example, the opponent hits you with 10 arts cards, then you're gonna have 100% the next special move arts damage inflicted, and the moment you use a blue card, land it, the buffs are removed. He also reduces enemy ki by 20, and it activates 5 times, for a total of 100 ki, so this could at least activate within 2 combo instances, so I do believe that that adds on to his utility and his ability to kind of prevent the enemy from hitting him, and allowing you, as the player who's using Gogeta, to perform a proper counterattack. Moving on to the fourth and final unique ability, I decided to call it Debut of the Godly Supreme Fusion, and to break it down, first of all, we have an effect where he shortens his own substitution count by 1 as default. You can see this effect on Zenkai Majin Buu Saga Super Saiyan 2 Goku. He's the yellow one, and he was buffed during the Majin Buu Saga celebration. He has this effect where his sub-counts always start off as 9 instead of 10, and I thought this would be a great effect for Gogeta, because again, he gets buffs when he enters the battlefield, specifically his special cover change nullification. And by having shorter sub-counts, you can actually see him show that off a lot more often. And on top of that, he also has this effect. The following effects occur when this character enters the battlefield while there is a defeated battle member, so it's a similar effect to Ultra Gogeta, Super Gogeta, but his effects, I definitely decided to make it a bit more powerful. He draws his ult for a second time and only activates once, and so like this is fair, I think. And he also applies the buff effect nullifies enemies, destroy card effects. So when he draws this ult from having a defeated battle member, his ult can't be destroyed for 50 timer counts because the effect is also uncancelable. He reduces enemy ki by 100, reduces enemy Dragon Balls by 1, and inflicts enemy with no switching for 10 timer counts, which basically means a free ult, right? Because this works together with the top part of the unique ability, the third one, where he gets effects when the enemy evades with a vanishing step. When your opponent can't switch, can't rush, at least hopefully the opponent doesn't have like Dragon Ball Destruction immunity, and he doesn't have any cards to use because his ki is set to 0, I guess, you know, the opponent could still activate their main ability, but you have an ult in your arm. You have an ult in your hand, that obviously beats special moves and can at least end up in a Dokubaki impact if you try to put it against against another ultimate, right? So this basically makes comboing a lot easier, and if your opponent can't react properly or does a vanish, which is, which, as you can see here, if the opponent performs a vanishing step, then Gogeta's is going to get a bunch of extra buffs and hit even harder. So that's the kind of synergy between unique abilities there. But generally, I think that's where his unique abilities end. I do believe that this will make him a lot stronger, a lot more effective. It does make him interesting because his ultimate is super hard hitting. And so you get to see a lot more of that because it activates twice now, thanks to his fourth unique ability. Sorry, I keep switching up unique gauge and unique ability in my head, and so I kind of say it in a different tone. His limited Z ability obviously remains the same, nothing to change there, and his Z ability obviously cannot be changed. But what can be changed, however, is not changed necessarily, but added, would be his Zenkai ability. I think he should buff yellow movies, but all of his teams already have Zenkai buffers, so any team would really work. I strongly suggest evading God Key and Saiyan because they already have a bunch of characters on there. There are a bunch of God Key yellow Zenkai buffers and yellow Saiyan Zenkai buffers as well, so really unnecessary there. I do believe Salgas from the movies needs the help from a Zenkai buffer, so that's where I'm going to be putting them. And moving on to the arts card. Here's the crazy part that I only found out recently as I was making this video. Gogeta's strikes don't have blast armor for some reason. I don't know why. He needs to have blast armor, and here I've taken parts from Ultra Gogeta Blue because at least he has blast armor, right? It's just a regular blast arts, but he doesn't have like additional effects. He's no added effects, just the addition of blast armor. And for his blue card, here's the neat part, right? He has anti-armor, which is an effect that you can see on Super 17, where his blast darts actually deal more damage against enemies who are using blast armor. And so here I've already prepared, instead of having 100% the blast damage inflicted against the enemy's armor, I was thinking 200%, just so that it can hit even harder, especially considering how many units have blast armor nowadays. Like Goku and Vegeta, as well as Vegeta and Goku, the headliners of the 6th anniversary, have blast armor at their base, right? When they're still tag units, they already have blast armor, and that's kind of busted, especially if you don't have Gohan and you don't have armor break cards. I think this card can definitely be the difference maker between, you dealing a ton of damage to the enemy and you just getting comboed over and over again by the enemy who has an infinite supply of blast armor. Moving on to one of his most unique and recognizable cards, the God Counter. He reduces damage received by 30% for 5 timer counts upon activation, and the whole point of this effect is to kind of... It's more of a safety net in the response or in the situation that your counter misses, and your opponent actually goes for a blast instead or a special move instead. This effect actually helps mitigate the damage that you would have received. And I've actually buffed it further to 50%. It cannot be cancelled and cannot be stacked, and as compared to before where it could be cancelled. I think 50% is definitely a better number, especially now with so many units who can just one-shot with their blue card or with their ultimate. I think having that extra 50% damage reduction could be the difference maker between how powerful Gogeta could be. And obviously the counter effect remains the same, but originally he actually draws a strike arts and gets 40 key, and then 50% damage inflicted for 10 timer counts, as well as cancelling enemy attribute upgrades and inflicting the enemy with no switching for 5 timer counts. So the modifications I've made, you can see here. First off, the strike arts card remains the same. I don't think there's a real reason to change it. You could theoretically change it to draw like a blue card or an ultimate the first time around, and then draw strike arts for every other consecutive activation. But I've kept it simple here with a strike arts card draw, and also giving him 100 key, because nowadays there are so many characters who can reduce key, so having a full key bar or gauge or whatever, it definitely helps him start combos and maintain them a lot easier, especially if you want to change the strikes in the strike that you get from the green card into a blue card. Can definitely make him work. I've also buffed his damage inflicted effect from 50 to 70% for 10 timer counts and cannot be cancelled, because 10 timer counts matches the new duration of no switching that I'm giving to him there. Instead of 5, he gets 10 timer counts of no switching, and that matches with the 70% damage that he gets if he does land counter. On top of that, he doesn't just land attribute upgrades anymore, but also buff effects. So I guess, special cover change nullification, that kind of thing, or nullifies, reduce key effects, and the such get nullified if the enemy does not have, you know, canceling immunity on those effects. So, you know, I guess the rest remains the same. It's just that these effects are much more enhanced, and you can definitely see them play a more prominent role in battle if you were to ever activate them. Now moving on to the blue card, Stardust Shooter. Originally, he gets 30% damage inflicted for 15 timer counts upon activation, which means that even if you miss the blue card, you're going to get 30% damage for all of your attacks, which is already pretty good. It's obviously a much smaller number in comparison to a lot of other special move damage effects, but it still works. And on top of that, he gets a... he doesn't get anything else, but he does inflict the enemy with 50% decrease to their health restoration for 20 timer counts, if you do actually end up landing it, which is pretty good. So I decided to make it even better. First of all, he gets 40% of damage inflicted for 20 timer counts upon activation. I guess you can make it uncancelable as well. It's just that 40% is a pretty decent number, especially if you're not actually landing the hit, and 20 timer counts is a long duration. So you may actually see these effects, you know, if it was uncancelable, it may be a little too strong, but that may be the thing that Gogeta needs. So if that's really what should happen, I wouldn't really have a problem with it. If you do want to make it uncancelable, I can completely understand that perspective. And on top of that, instead of reducing the enemy's health restoration by 50%, he's reducing it by 100, because, you know, I think a lot of units heal very often nowadays, and so having this health restoration basically sealing effect where healing doesn't even activate anymore, it's perfect, especially with fighting characters who have endurance and the such. And now for the ult, Meteor Explosion. It does do supreme impact damage at its base, I'll show you here in a second. He does do supreme impact damage as, like, before he even Zenkais, he does supreme impact damage, which is good. And he gets 30% to ultimate damage inflicted for 3 timer counts, because he already gets some ultimate damage buffs from his previous unique abilities. When he lands a strike or blast, he gets 5% ultimate damage per hit. And on top of that, he also nullifies enemy endurance, which is just, you know, the classic, the baseline standard for ultimates nowadays. I decided to make it even better though. First of all, he gets 50% to ultimate damage inflicted for 3 timer counts, which matches with the effect from the previous unique ability, right? Because he gets a maximum of 50% 50% to ultimate damage inflicted if you do end up using 10 strike or blast arts cards. And then you get the other 50% here from the ultimate itself to total out to 100%. That's definitely where the effect is going to shine. And on top of that, his endurance nullification is uncancelable. So yeah, I think I've been talking for long enough. Like, it's almost been like 30 minutes. It's past 20 actually. So yeah, that's what I think should be, you know, the kind of kit that you should be seeing. That what I think is probably the best kit for Gogeta for when he Zenkai Awakens. I do think this is definitely going to optimize a lot of his abilities and fill in the blanks where he's missing a lot. I think if I were to actually look back and see what I've typed down, one of the things that I would like to change is to give him more arts card draw speed on at least one of his cards, like maybe the green card. I think his green card could definitely have that additional effect. Let me pull it up real quick. If his green card gave him like arts card draw speed for like 1 or 2 levels for an extended duration, that would be perfect. But yeah, I think that's really what I think Gogeta needs in order to be a proper Zenkai Awakening LF and return to the meta in a elegant and well accepted fashion. Because, you know, because I guess it's the main reason I say that is because bad Zenkai Awakenings, especially for previously meta Legends Limited units, are often not very well received by the community, so I do want this Gogeta to kind of re-enter the meta in a proper way, and to have him be well received, similar to how Fusion Zamasu and, you know, how his Zenkai Awakening was received, because everyone loves it. It's a perfect way to buff the character and make him even better than he already is, because he sucked for an extended period of time, and now we're finally seeing him come back into the meta. Hopefully we get to see the same thing with these buffs for Gogeta. I'm not entirely sure if these buffs are going to be enough, but I think through the right kind of balancing and, you know, increasing his power and kind of creating these weak spots for the character in certain other places, they can definitely make a Zenkai Awakening that satisfies most of the community. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for this video. Bye, and thanks for watching.